Hello everyone, welcome to Drishti IAS. My name is Saloni Nankyolier, and in this video we will be discussing the 100% tariff which has been imposed on pharmaceutical imports in the US. We will be analyzing its impact specifically on the Indian pharmaceutical companies. So let us see what has happened. This morning, US President Donald Trump, he notified that starting October 1, 2025, a 100% tariff is going to be imposed on any branded or patented pharmaceutical product in the US. The only caveat here being that if a pharmaceutical company is setting up a manufacturing unit, is building a manufacturing unit in America, they are going to be exempted from this tariff. And by is building, he meant breaking ground and or under construction. So if a pharmaceutical company is constructing a manufacturing unit in the US, they are going to be exempted. Other than that, all the pharmaceutical imports which fall under the category of branded or patented drugs will have to face a tariff of 100%. Now let us break down these key terms here because it also has a science and technology angle to it. What are branded drugs, patented drugs, biosimilars, generic drugs? We'll talk about all these things. So, the first category is of patented drugs. What do we mean by patented drugs? Patented drugs are completely new drugs. They are a completely new discovery. When a company, when it does a lot of R&D and it creates a completely new drug, they file for a patent. And that patent, when granted, usually lasts for 20 years. So this is a completely new drug, and because a lot of R&D has gone into it, it is naturally going to be pricier because the company needs to compensate its R&D cost also. So this is going to be on the pricier side. But the 20-year period is when only the patent company or its licensees can actually sell that drug. It has monopoly over selling that drug. No other company will be able to sell that particular drug. So these patented drugs will face a tariff of 100% starting October 1, 2025. Next we have branded drugs, which can be categorized into patented and generic. So what do we mean by patented branded drugs? These are the same drugs that we discussed in the previous slide, because all those patented drugs will be sold under a brand name, under a company name. So they are going to make the branded patented drugs. But sometimes generic drugs also become branded drugs. For example, paracetamol. This is a generic drug. But when that same paracetamol is being sold under the name of Crocin or Dolo 650, this becomes a branded generic drug because now it has a specific brand name associated to it, and then it gets costlier. So this branded generic, branded patented drug and branded generic drug is also going to see a tariff of 100%. Then there are some categories which have been exempted, like generic drugs. Generic drugs have been exempted. So what are generic drugs? These are the drugs which will be created after the completion of the patent period, after the expiration of the patent term. So after 20 years have expired, all the other companies will start using the same active ingredients, the same formulation, and they'll start replicating the same drug. Now the monopoly of selling that drug will not lie with only one company. All the other companies will also be able to sell that drug. And then that same patented drug will now start to exist as a generic drug because the monopoly ceases to exist. So these generic drugs are exempted at the moment. For example, paracetamol, this is a generic drug. Then we have something else which is known as a biosimilar. Till now we were talking about chemical drugs. Now we come to biosimilars. Biosimilars are actually the generic variations of biomedicines. And what are these biomedicines? These are the drugs which are created from living organisms, microorganisms, cells, tissues. So these make up biomedicines. And when a company, it creates a completely new biomedicine, they will also file for a patent. Patent will last for 20 years. After the expiration of 20 years, all the other companies will be able to create that same drug, but they will be seeing some variations. Why is it called a biosimilar? Because they'll not be able to replicate the exact same drug, because here we are talking about living organisms, cells, tissues, microorganisms. You will not be able to replicate the exact same drug. That is why what you create will be known as a biosimilar. In fact, the original brand also, let's say brand A created that drug, it made that discovery. Even the original brand will see variations from one batch to another, because we are talking about living organisms. So what we create, the generic version of biomedicines, will be known as a biosimilar. And these biosimilars right now are also exempted. So these are the categories of drugs which have been exempted, and something else has also been exempted that I already told you about, that the pharmaceutical companies who are setting up that manufacturing units in America, and by setting up the unit, he literally meant, like Trump literally meant, that you have to start physical activities on the soil of the US. Simple plans or declaration of plans that you're going to start a manufacturing unit in the US is not going to help. You should literally start with physical activity, like literal digging of the ground and laying foundation needs to happen, needs to have started on the soils of the US. Only then you will be exempted. If you have just made plans, or you have just declared that you wish to set up a factory, you're going to set up a factory in the near future, that is not going to provide you with an exemption. So these are exempted. Only the companies who have started their manufacturing units, it is under construction, they will be exempted. Rest all will face the tariff. Now let us look at the impact. Will the Indian companies see an impact? Yes, they will. And why? Because 40% of our total pharmaceutical export, it happens to the US. So this goes to the US. That is why if there's any change in the US markets, if there's any policy, any declaration that is going to bring about change in the export-import dynamics of our sectors with the US, we are going to see an impact. There will be consequences, because 40% happens in financial year 2025 only. We saw that 40% of the export went to the US. In fact, the major players that we have here, the major pharmaceutical companies, they generate 30 to 50% of their annual revenue from the US. So this is a huge amount. 30 to 50% of the revenue is also coming from the US. So naturally an impact is going to be there. And that is why, because of this declaration, our Sensex saw a dip. All our big pharma units, they saw a dip, because this shakes the investor confidence. All these types of declarations, they shake investor confidence, and the Sensex takes a negative dip. So this is what happened. And because we have such a huge amount of trade with the US markets, any change is going to have an impact on us. So what is that impact going to be? Firstly, our drugs are going to be expensive, like they'll be pricier. The small companies might not be able to compete. Small companies might not be able to compete. Because here we are talking about setting up industry, setting up manufacturing units in America. Small companies might not be able to do it, and the ones who are able to do it, they'll see an increase in their drug price. So naturally our prices, our drugs will now stop being cheaper, and they'll be pricier in the US market. So our industries are going to be impacted by this. And what is going to be the impact on the US? US is also going to see an impact, because now that our drugs have become expensive, the health systems will also have to bear a cost to the health systems, because the patients there who rely on our medicines, they will now have to pay extra to get our medicines. So the health systems will also have to bear a cost. And if they decide to go domestic, so the pressure is going to increase on the domestic manufacturers. pressure is going to increase, and the problem here would be that overnight you cannot build capacity to do that. So capacity building will take time. You can compensate, maybe you can have more production in the domestic market, but that will take time. It's a gradual process. So what is going to happen in the intermediate time? You will have to pay extra money, like the US citizens will have to pay extra money, patients will have to pay extra money to get that hold of Indian medicines. So domestic markets is going to see an increase in the pressure, and the health systems also in the US are going to see an increase in their prices. The cost is going to be borne by them. So what should be done? What should be our way forward? How do we deal with this? First and foremost, we need to have diversification of our market. Because I told you that 40% of our exports were going to the US. 30 to 50% of the revenue these companies were generating from the US. Where is the diversification? There is no diversification. We're relying heavily on the US. So we need to start looking for alternative markets, for emerging economies, for developing economies. So we need to diversify our market so that these things, they do not hamper us so much. We export 40% if you look at the statistics, but the US is importing only 6%. So for us, it is a 40% export, but for them, it's only 6%. So they will still be able to bear the shock. But what about us? Our exporters are exporting 40%. So we need to be more careful about our market selection. We need diversification in our markets. Next, a domestic ramp up is also needed. We need to expand our domestic base. We need to get more buyers in the domestic market and stop relying so heavily on markets outside. Our home market should also be able to satisfy the needs that we have in here, so that whatever production is happening, of course we'll do trade with outside the world also, but whatever production is happening here, the domestic market should also be able to consume it. There should be enough demand in the domestic market also. So domestic markets also need to see a ramp up. Then maybe we can also start looking at tie-ups. Because whatever happens, we will not just cut off our ties with the US. We'll just stop exporting to the US. That is not going to happen. So maybe we can have tie-ups, because what is the Trump administration saying? That you need to set up a manufacturing unit on the soil of the US. So big companies can do it, but small companies cannot do it. So what about those small exporters? Those small exporters maybe can think of having tie-ups with big exporters, so that then together they can set up a manufacturing unit, and it is a win-win situation for both of them. So this is what India needs to do, and of course it needs to engage in bilateral as well as legal talks, so as to understand the exemptions, the ambiguity, everything. Right now, generic products, the generic drugs and biosimilars, they are not included. But will they never be included? We don't know. So we need to have these bilateral talks. We need to have these legal terms, technicalities, everything cleared off, so that there's no ambiguity. And at the same time, we need to look for diversification of our markets also, because we are heavily relying on one market, and that market right now is very unpredictable. So that is what India needs to do. So this was all for today's video. I hope you understood whatever we discussed. Now let us practice a question for prelims. In September 2025, the US announced a 100% tariff on certain pharmaceutical imports from India. Which of the following statements is or are correct? 1. The tariff applies to branded and patented drugs. 2. Generic drugs and approved biosimilars are currently exempt. 3. Indian companies can avoid the tariff if they are building a manufacturing facility in the US, where building means breaking ground or under construction. Choose the correct statements. 1 and 2 only, 1 only, 2 only, 1, 2 and 3. Please provide your answers in the comment section, and we will meet in a new video.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.